All right, Commissioner Savas, it's that time and the C4 meeting is yours.
Great, thank you, Trent. Good evening, everyone. We have some new guests here tonight, so we'll do introductions, but first, Trent is going to prepare the flag so we can do our Pledge of Allegiance. There we go. So if you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Right, thank you. So I'm gonna go around. The fastest way I think to do introductions is to just go down the Hollywood squares here, I believe. And I'm going to change my view. And so I'm Paul Savas, Clackamas County Commissioner and co-chair of C4. Mayor Hodson hopefully will join us. He's the other co-chair. And first up on my screen is Martin Myers. Could you introduce yourself, Martin?
Hi, I'm Martin Myers. I am the essentially the rural rep here for the CPOs out in the rural areas of Clackamas County. I specifically am the chair for Redland Biola Fishers Mill. Good evening, everyone. Good to see you all.
Great, thank you. Next up on my screen is Paul Gornick.
Hello all, I'm Paul Gornick from Oak Lodge Water Services District. I represent sanitary districts.
Okay, thank you. And next up, Councilor Sherman.
Hello, everybody. Brett Sherman, City Councilor, Happy Valley, representing cities in the county, not the big ones, but the littler ones.
Okay, thank you. Ed Gronke.
Hi, Ed Gronke, the citizen representative for Clackamas County to the Metro Policy Advisory Committee.
Okay. Next up, we have our first visit from Commissioner Adam Morrow from Oregon City.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you, Commissioner Savas. Adam Morrow, Oregon City Commissioner. I am the new liaison from Oregon City since our mayor has since stepped down. So I'm looking forward to getting to know some of you, and it's good to see a lot of familiar faces as well.
Great, great to have you aboard. Councilor Pratt.
Valerie Pratt, Twelton City Council, and I guess I represent the cities that go over two counties.
All right. Next up, Councilor Heisey.
Hello, everyone. I'm Councilor Kathy Heisey from Milwaukee, and I am also the Milwaukee City's representative to JPACT.
Great. And I see Metro Councilor Craddock.
Hello, everyone. Shirley Craddock, Metro Councilor. I represent the east part of the region, which includes Multnomah County and some of the unincorporated areas of Clackamas County. And I'm subbing tonight for Metro Councilor Lewis, and I sit on JPAC.
Great, thank you for joining us. And another new face to C4, Rachel Verdict.
Hi, thank you. I'm from Lake Oswego, and I am here subbing tonight for Mayor Buck.
Great, thank you for joining us. And the squares are moving around. I see a Sherry French.
Hi, Sherry French, President of Clackamas River Water Board of Commissioners.
Great, thank you for joining us. Mayor Walters.
Hi, I'm Mayor Jules Walters from West Lynn, and I'm going to be on for a little bit, then I have to jump off and jump back on. So hopefully I'll be here to fill any quorum need we have.
Okay. I'm looking for some other names here that I believe are members of C4. Charity Hughes, are you a member of C4?
Yes, hi, good evening. I'm the alternate I'm on City Council with Estacada, and I'm the alternate for Mayor Drinkwine. We had a last minute change, and unfortunately he couldn't be here. And I apologize for my blacked out screen, but I'm also at a softball game, my daughter's softball game. So I'm multitasking this evening. So thanks for having me and great to be here.
Okay, well, keep us apprised of the score.
I will. Estacada's winning.
Good, good, excellent. I see a Derek Jericho.
Hi, this is Derek Jericho. I'm representing the Hamlet of Milano and the CPO of Milano.
Great, thank you for having us. I think that concludes our introductions to the members of C4, and going back to my agenda here. First order of business is the housekeeping approval of the May 5th C4 minutes. Are there any changes, alterations, comments, or is there a motion to accept?
I'll motion that we accept the minutes.
Okay.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Great, thank you. Been moved by Councilor Platt and seconded by Martin Myers. Is there anyone who is not in favor of the minutes? Please wave your hand or signify otherwise. Okay, I'll accept that as the minutes being approved. Thank you all. So next up on our agenda is the main feature, I believe. So Trent, I'm going to let you introduce our folks from TriMet, our Forward Together update.
Thanks, and I'm going to give that privilege to Mr. Tom Markgraf, your C4 member, and we'll just note that one of his team is Luke Norman, who used to be on CTAC, so has that C4 history with you here tonight. All yours, Tom.
Thanks very much. I just want to let you know, for the last 8 or 9 months, we've been going through a process to do a real deep dive in all the service delivery of our almost 600 square miles. We did this in response to COVID, and we did it to see what patterns were emerging and what patterns we think are going to go forward into the future. I think this is something that we've talked about before with C4, and I think it's something we've all been interested in. We did this was a massive study, and we did it with working with all the local jurisdictions and staff. And so we did that with your staff also. They were terrific. They were really helpful. We shared all the information and we were completely transparent. And these were really deep dives. Today, Grant O'Connell was our lead working in Clackamas County, and he's going to talk to you about this. We're also going to touch on a couple of other issues real briefly. First of all, we just want to give you a heads up. We're starting working with ODOT on transit mitigation for the tolling issues, and that's something that I brought to this group many times. It's something that I always say, that's the one thing right now I've been losing sleep on. We want to make sure that gets going, because that's a big deal. And the other thing is we want to touch upon the Oregon Transit Center, which we think with the tolling mitigation is going to be really critical for making all of that work. And we have to work, we think, with the other providers, because it's got to be like fingers coming together with TriMet and the other providers to actually do the mitigation. So we're just going to touch on that a little bit. But that's the introduction I wanted to give us. And I wanted to ask Grant to take us forward and explain what we've been learning. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tom Markgraf. That's really great introduction. We've done a lot of great work so far, but we're only kind of halfway through on this project. So this will be an update of where we're at, and we'll be back. So I'm going to talk about Forward Together. It's a comprehensive look at all of our fixed route service, and then Luke Norman will pick up to talk about the tolling mitigation and Oregon City Transit Center. I'm going to go ahead and jump in and share my screen here. I believe kind of a memo of synopsis was sent, and on that web page, in that memo is a link to a web page that has the full existing conditions and market analysis reports. But as Tom said, this is acknowledging that we may be in a very pivotal moment in the transit history. The transportation trends are changing, and we need to respond to it. So this is jump right into that. So just kind of a brief history of our most recent plans. Coming out of the Great Recession, we developed our service enhancement plans kind of in this year of fiscal 11 to fiscal 15. What you're seeing here is a chart of our fixed route vehicle hours. It's kind of our currency that we in service planning work in figuring out how much service we're putting out on the street. And so coming out of that Great Recession, we started to ramp up service as the economy rebounded. And that service that we put out was guided by our service enhancement plans that were developed in that window of time. And then House Bill 2017 came along and kind of accelerated that curve. We were able to pull more things forward from our service enhancement plans and deliver upon them even sooner than we had even anticipated. But then, of course, with the COVID pandemic, we had to, and the economic uncertainty that unfolded immediately thereafter, we pulled back on service. And all expansion, new service was halted. And I clarify, new service that was not associated with a capital project. Certainly the Division Transit project kept going and the Better Red project kept going because it had funding, federal funding attached to it. But our growth through the employer payroll taxes was halted, and then even service reduced. And so in a sense, if you think of it, the model of service that we've been working against is kind of been frozen in time of that that fall 2019 model. And we've taken cuts away from that. And now, 2 years in, we recognize that model may not be the right model to just simply snap back to, that whether as we come back out of this recession and the labor shortage, once it hopefully abates, we may not be adding back, simply going back to what was, but what is now needed. So that's sort of the crux of this project. I do want to clarify one thing in those cuts that we did. We took great pains to filter those cuts through our 10-factor equity index. With routes that serve areas of high community concern were preserved and still are to this day at the levels of pre-COVID levels. And those that travel in communities a little less concerned had a little bit greater cut. So that reduction that we've done during the pandemic has not been equal. And yet I would also note there's also been moments of especially in Clackamas County, good news that we were able to, with the Myers Road extension, thank you Oregon City, extend service out to Oregon City High School, even during the pandemic. So, but just kind of clarifying that those cuts were taken with a concern for equity among the community. So why are we doing this? I kind of already said this, but just reiterating, really COVID has just changed everything in the transportation world as we're sitting here right now on Zoom, and many will continue to do so for certain things. That pattern of telecommuting is proving to be durable. And what does that mean for our transportation system? We know that companies have relocated as a result of the pandemic, demographics have changed. But perhaps most importantly, it's shined a spotlight of the needs of essential workers and transit dependent. If you think of it this way, we were actually telling people if you had a choice during the pandemic to not ride, so that because we were forced to physically distance people on board our vehicles, we wanted to make sure that those limited spaces on board were available to those who needed it most. So these ridership patterns that have carried on through the pandemic really have shown us who needs us most. So how are we approaching this? What are we doing to respond to this moment? We've done surveys, employment data, development trends. We've done a survey out with the community, even with focus groups of employers. Reached out to Clackamas Community College as also, and some of the warehousing and distribution services along 212, 224 area there, just to gain some focus group type knowledge. And a lot of that is available in those reports on our website. And so we're going to take that knowledge in combination and build some scenarios around how we might restore service once this pandemic abates. So some of the key takeaways from that market study and just existing condition data, I'm going to just go through them here. This is, our ridership at the pandemic, over 50% drop, and it is returning. This data is only through January, and in, a lot of folks' offices reopening plans were kind of in March or so. And so we've seen an even steeper increase in ridership right now, but it still remains dramatically lower than what it once was in terms of ridership. Service levels lower, mostly now at this point due to the labor shortage. We would like to restore service, but we struggle to secure operators. So that's one existing condition bit of data. The ridership patterns, it's been really fascinating. So on this chart here, what you're looking at is ridership change in 2021 versus 2019, where kind of this orangish color is significant decline in ridership versus this teal color is sort of less than 10% or less than 10% decline, and even in some cases sustaining. And a clear pattern kind of emerges is like 82nd Avenue, Clackamas Town Center, routes that serve employment, retail, or in-person, high concentrations of in-person work that are not oriented towards downtown have really either sustained or declined even only slightly. So 82nd Avenue, Powell, MLK, TV Highway out west, the McLaughlin and into Clackamas corridor, there's very few orange in Clackamas at all, frankly. Ridership is sustaining or even increasing in Clackamas. So some more existing condition data that we found relevant. The peaks. So this takes a moment to sort of appreciate, but you've got this orange line of boardings per trips. You have bus trips in pure number, and then boardings. So pre-pandemic, we had more boardings than at the average sort of baseline at the peaks, the AM and PM peaks, and that's probably what one would have expected in the old model. So whatever service we could put out there, we did, and it was used. It was used. Whereas now, even in the pandemic, the AM peak, we see this still sort of a lingering AM peak, but notice that there are less boardings than there are trips now. And the productivity line, the boardings per trip, is actually below our average in the AM peak still. And yet the midday is actually more important, more productive than the AM peak, which is just, if you follow transit trends, this is just still remarkable. So it indicates to us that this sort of all-day, midday commute travel patterns is becoming more important in some ways than the AM and PM peaks. And I think that's to be expected. If you think about those essential workers that are on board throughout this pandemic, retail works like 10 to 7 type shifts. Warehousing and distribution services work more like 3 shifts, 6 to 2, 2 to 10 type thing. So that warehousing and distribution shift would actually show up as a midday. We then also mapped areas of in-person job employment, and that warehousing and distribution area along 212, 224, plus Clackamas Town Center shows up, some south of Oregon City shows up, but yet surprisingly downtown is still somewhat important. It's sort of downtown is not dying. It was a bit of a awareness moment for me as a person who does work in downtown, recognizing those that you know, all that goes into making downtown work, such as janitorial services or food service. 217 certainly shows up, Troutdale, Columbia Corridor, North Hillsborough. Equity index. So we have our 10-factor equity index. I wouldn't, you know, bother you to note every one of them, but looked at that and crossed that with where services is sustaining or increasing. And again, similar corridors show up along 82nd Avenue, TV Highway, McLaughlin, and the Columbia Corridor. But yet again, downtown, maybe the inner ring neighborhoods of Portland are not of equity concern as much as they once were, but downtown itself still is. So just kind of saying that again there. So that's, you know, those are the kind of the high level takeaways of some of the findings that we did as we tried to take a snapshot of what we are seeing in the trends for transit. So now we're going to take that forward into a comprehensive analysis of our service and develop some service alternatives for what future service might look like based around different goals. And I did some conversing with Trent by email, and I gained some insight into what Clackamas, the work that you all have done to set up your goals for transit service of efficiency, of completeness, access, and under legibility. And so that actually ties quite well to these three different scenarios that we're building. We're building these as concepts. They are taken, so if you took a goal of ridership versus coverage versus equity, those three different goals, and took them to their sort of logical extreme, what would those future transit networks look like? Because one can have a goal of ridership and coverage both, but in their own in isolation, they can lead you in different places where, so we're going to build scenarios of what future service might look like as informed by these different metrics. And the ultimate goal then will be to take these scenarios out again for public review. So that's when we'll come back to you. And so I'll go ahead now and just jump back to the timeline. So we've done the existing conditions and market analysis. We did that sort of first phase of outreach, and I attended CTAC, and that's what that jurisdictional coordination refers to. And now we are in this alternatives development and analysis phase right now, nearing the end of it, where we are developing these three different scenarios informed by those three different goals. And then we're going to take that back out to you all and imagine what our future transit service network could look like and get some feedback on those different scenarios. And I say this I kind of said this earlier, but these are concepts, these are ideas, these are reactions for public discourse to help get us some guidance about how we might proceed forward. And we'll ask folks to take what they like from each of the three different scenarios, and we'll build a final scenario based around what are the best parts of each of those three different alternatives. So that's kind of how this will play out in the path forward. I've blathered on for quite a bit. I'm going to stop here and take some questions, because I hope that all made some sense, and I'm happy to revisit any particular points. I guess before I do so, one thing I need to get out front, we're in this very singular, unique time where the issue right now is not necessarily funding, it's labor. We can, based on the funding that's floated us through with the federal aid packages, as well as the surprisingly strong economy and the payroll tax funding, we see the potential for about a 32% growth over the next 3 to 5 years from where we are today. Keep in mind that some of that is a restoration of what was. You know, we're at about 80% of where service was pre-pandemic. And so if you add that 20% back, and then you add the additional growth that we're forecasting through the various funding sources that we have, that gets you to about 32% growth from where we are today in the next 3 to 5 years that we could grow. And so this is our plan to grow back, to restore service coming out of the pandemic, and do it in a different way and respond to the time and the moment and the trends that we're seeing now. So that is the kind of crux of the project, again, in a nutshell. So with that, I'll take some questions here.
Great. Can you restore the screen, please?
Absolutely.
Great. Well, I'll kick it off with a question and I'll wait for others to raise their hands. Could you explain to me, you mentioned early on about the 205 project, and I certainly know what the partnership is with ODOT and SMART with regard to the pilot project for bus on shoulder. But are there any discussions? We should know, but we really don't. What to anticipate with any added service other than the Oregon City Transit Center improvements?
I think most of this I will leave for Luke. This project is so near term. We're talking about if we can get all of our ducks in a row, that we might try to implement this next fiscal year. And so this is really just trying to say, hey, we're actually maybe a little behind the 8 ball in responding to the trends of the pandemic. We need to plan to restore in a way that responds to the pandemic. And so that's my focus. But I will say with that, the changes in ridership pattern have elevated certain priorities to the fore that maybe were a little lower down in the past. And in the scenarios that we're looking at, it is very likely, we're still working on those scenarios, it's very likely that there will be a Tualatin to Oregon City connection in all 3 of the scenarios. And what that means is, for me, is that's probably something we're going to end up doing no matter what. But Luke will speak more about that in specific on his work responding to the tolling mitigation program.
Okay, great. First question or hand up, I think, was Councilor Pratt.
Hi, Grant. Wow, reading through this, it's like you've got a lot of different objectives to try to meet that probably pretty somewhat limited budget. So good work for you. I'm wondering, just reading through this, the focus is so much on ridership to workplace destinations. And I'm wondering if you looked at people just going to the stores, especially like seniors, and how much ridership you have from that and whether it was considered.
Yes, in my slide, I may have glossed over it too quickly. So I am just going to share my screen again and talk more about one thing. One of the ways in which we're going to evaluate the 3 different alternatives that we're going to put out is how they improve access. And this visual kind of shows how we might do that. There's a person, it's very hard to see, but there's a person dropped at about 136 between Division and Stark. And each color shading shows how it's an isochrone analysis. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it, but how far that person can get on the network within each time frame. And so the red is 2 hours, the blue is like 30 minutes. And that person can get all the way to Hillsborough on this analysis in 2 hours, but they can't get to that little white spot just north of them between Halsey and Gleason in 2 hours on our network, because so much of the network is focused on east-west connections. And so that's an example of the type of analysis that we're going to do, is see how these different scenarios perform at getting people to and from all sorts of destinations, but specifically, sorry, I guess, is the screen share still on?
Yes.
Oh, it is. Okay. But specifically, we have built a database that we use in our equity work of essential destinations such as social services, affordable food, et cetera. And so that will be part of the access analysis to actually measure not only the travel time to and from jobs and residents, but also to those specific essential destinations.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for that mention of 1210 to Oregon City. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, next up, Councilor Sherman.
Thank you. Grant, good information. And actually that last slide you just put up was a great one because it shows Happy Valley with effectively nothing from a transit perspective in the center. And one could argue that it was a 2-hour commute time from Division and Stark or whatever those two crossroads were. That's probably a 2-hour walk from that location. So the transportation doesn't actually work in that. And so I've got a broad observation, not really a question, but maybe it'll turn into a question by the time I'm done talking about it. So my question is, I have a bit of a disconnect, and really part of it is in relation to kind of the reduction of service and ridership in the current environment. And I think, you talked about like a 30%, you've got funding for a potential 30% increase, at a 30% or 30 percentage point increase, because those are different things from our 80% or 20% reduction. So, and the reason I ask it in that way is, as we look at moving forward, we're kind of looking through the lens of where we've been and where we are. And with all the things we have going on in the region from a transportation perspective, a housing perspective, when you look at like the changes we're making with the climate friendly areas, reduction of parking, reliance on public transportation for this future growth, and then also in relation to the I-205 improvement project, the congestion pricing project, these really broad sweeping changes to the region are absolutely predicated on a robust, effective, cost-effective transportation option for the public. And without that future of a robust public transportation system, all of those fail, or they are really underwater. And so my question is, as you do the modeling, as you look forward, how do you take into account, or are you able to take into account these really broad sweeping changes that are going to mandate people use public transportation, or the systems completely fail? Is that kind of part of the calculus?
We're not agnostic of it, but for this is a quick burn project. We wrap up in November. For this project, we're singularly kind of focused, like you said, frankly, on where we are and where we were and responding to this moment. But we do recognize that those service enhancement plans, which is more of our long range vision of where transit needs to go in the future, are a little long in the tooth and not maybe calibrated to the future that's now starting to happen. And so we do recognize that immediately following this project, we will be following on with kind of a 2.0. So this will build a new baseline for us of where we are in response to recent trends, but then we'll work with your staff. I've already been in contact with Laura Turway and Jamie Lorenzini, and they're great. But rebuilding our longer range plans for where we need to go in the future and how we can get there. Because again, you have to recognize this is something we want to implement just like next year, but then the years after. So this is our new baseline. Where do we go from there? We need to do very quickly. And so you're absolutely spot on, and we know we need to do that. So,
all right, thank you. I appreciate it.
Can I take on to that? Just before the pandemic, when Doug Kelsey was our previous general manager, he and I met with, I think, most or all of the mayors out there in Clackamas County, and we had a discussion, and it's going to require a huge partnership. Because remember, it's the small cities that control and manage the policies of how they manage their streets. And if we're going to move buses faster through their communities, we're going to have their buy-in to this too. So it's not just TriMet. We can throw all the service out on the street you want, but you got to be able to make the buses move faster. So that's going to be a big thing that we're going to need your help with.
All right, thank you.
Next up, Councilor Heisey.
Well, that was a great lead into some of what I've got rattling around in my head, Tom. And I'm curious if there are any recommendations you expect to come out of this for some of the cities in Clackamas. You know, I think it's really interesting that the county is one of the places where you saw ridership maintain relatively flat. You didn't have a lot of the orange or khaki areas, as you pointed out in the map. So I just thought that was a really interesting observation, given that Clackamas County so often we struggle because there is so much, you know, white space on the map. And we're just trying to cover a larger geographic area that has more complicated demands than, say, Southeast Portland, where you've got a network and it's a pretty straightforward structure that you've already got. So I guess I'm wondering, recommendations for local government coming out of this, anything that's specific that's coming out of this tour that's perhaps unique to Clackamas County. And then just also thinking about the part where we know what ultimately works in the long run for getting increased ridership and getting dedicated ridership is reliable service that's easy to get to, and you have choices that you can make. And that in a grid, you know, it looks like Southeast Portland or downtown Portland, right? You've got 3 or 4 different buses that are arriving at different times that you could take from, you know, 39th Avenue to get somewhere. So when we know that, and we're thinking about the questions that you're positing in this study about these 3 different scenarios and where to go, I guess I'm trying to think about, and I'm looking for any guidance you might have on which wireframe that you might choose right now will best serve the 2.0 step, the next step, to continuing to build out that network that would be ready for the, you know, the future that Councillor Sherman was talking about, that would get us further down the road and increase ridership, would get us that dense network that's reliable, has options that people know that they can count on. It was a whole lot of questions at one time. I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, I appreciate that it's grateful that we have such great partners across the region that are thinking about all these things. A couple of things I would just quickly respond to. There is the recommendation to focus on, as Tom said, making sure that travel times for transit are competitive. And that is on, you know, we can work with you, but it is a bit on the roadway jurisdiction. So that's one thing, that there is a clear nexus there, that by making those travel times competitive, it becomes an attractive alternative. But I would say one thing is that I don't think there's a lot of good in fixating on lines on the map, because the line is only as good as how often it comes. And you know, you can have a lot of lines on the map and they only run once an hour. That's just not, that's not a service that folks can, you know, walk out their door and feel like they can find reliable to suit their needs. And so getting service that is sustainable in a way that a clear recommendation is that TriMet focus on, rather than throwing a lot of service at those peak hours, which we had to do in a lot of cases to cover the heavy loads oriented towards down, but rather than throwing all that peak service out, but making sure that if a line runs, that it runs regularly, consistently all day throughout the day, so that it can be considered reliable for those who really need it. So I do flinch a little when folks look at the map and focus on the lines, because there's a lot more to it than what the color of that line is can mean a lot more than what it actually, whether it exists or not. So, but all good points there. Is there more that you wanted me to address that I maybe missed?
Well, I would just clarify that, yes, absolutely. I did not mean that lines were important. I meant that
Yeah.
You know, as someone who was a frequent rider for, as you can tell, many years in Southeast Portland, what made that feasible for me was the flexibility of having 3 or 4 different buses I could choose from at the drop of a hat, that were really available, and knowing that they would run on a regular basis. So I absolutely do hear you on that. It's the flexibility was great, but the reliability and consistency is the key thing.
Yeah.
I loved having 3 or 4 different choices. If I got stuck downtown or, you know, somewhere in North Portland, I had choices. It's great. But what I needed in order to get me to take transit as the option was to know that there was at least one bus that was coming every 15 minutes, no matter what. If that bus was full, another bus would be 4 minutes behind it that I would be able to get on. So I absolutely understand what you're saying. I guess what I'm, the question that I didn't quite hear an answer to in there is, I guess I'm trying to future cast a little here. How are the choices we're making now around transit service going to serve us in building the network we most need, given all of the changes that Councilor Sherman mentioned that we're confronting and embracing, hopefully, you know, in terms of how travel in the region will be changing in the not too distant future. Maybe that was a better way to phrase it.
Well, it's working together. I mean, you know, South Hillsboro's been a really great model for us. We designed the layover for the bus to go there before the bus even is there. And so the elements to make that work are already in place. And so we're ready to flip the switch. And so as we work together, as you know, we have a planning staff that is happy to work with all of you as you are developing or zoning, what have you, a street or neighborhood. We can work together to make sure that that we have the elements that are needed in place for the long run. So I think it's really just open communication and working together. I wouldn't say that this study is particularly looking at those issues, but that's, so just as a, you know, person to person, colleague to colleague, that's what I would say.
And I can't help myself. I want to jump in one more time. I hear you, Councilor Heisey. What we want and what I think everybody wants is a lot more frequency, a lot more service, going to a lot more places. We carry 4% of the mode share of the region, and that's not good enough. We need to carry a lot more. When you look at places like Vienna, they carry 39% of all the mode share. But they do that because they throw a lot of transit at it, so that it's like the logical, easy thing to do. Everybody does it. Nobody wants to own a car because it's expensive. We want to get to that place. We want to get to the place where we've got those little shuttles connecting, kind of, I always call it the trunk lines that we operate. Those little shuttles doing the last mile stuff. So you get off at Oak Grove and you need to go, you know, a mile left or right. I don't know. We need those kinds of connections. I'll shut up now. I'm sorry. I get excited.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in with one of mine real fast before I go to the next one. It just seems like the right timing. The white areas that Councilor Heisey was referring to, I call just the transit deserts, parts of Clackamas County where there's no service. And pre-pandemic, I have the luxury of having some history on serving on TriMet committees and serving with the county. And about 2018, 2019, I reached out pretty aggressively to TriMet and our board members that are on TriMet that represent Clackamas County and others, asking, hey, what's next? I mean, what is the future of transit for Clackamas County, so that we can have some predictability as to making investments in high density housing and so forth. And yet, with HB 2001 and a number of changes that are happening, that density is coming upon us. But yet, in anticipation of transit, the answer I got in 2018 and 19, again, pre-pandemic, was, well, there's no resources to do that, and they don't foresee any resources coming. So if we just pretend for a minute that the COVID crisis, the pandemic never happened, I guess my question would be, how do we get where we need to get? I mean, how do we get the coverage? And I appreciate the lines and showing the network there. It's a great example. And you mentioned the east-west, and really we don't have much east-west. We certainly have two north-souths, but not much east-west and not much in between. And Tom, I appreciate your comments. Yeah, you can get off McLaughlin and you can go east or west, but you're going to go either uphill or downhill. And it's the topography challenges that require, local shuttles, jitneys, whatever you want, a local circulator, whatever you want to call it, that can, at least help augment some of the ridership, I think, if we did it correctly, onto, those north-south runs, 82nd Avenue and McLaughlin. But we're building it. It's a chicken and the egg. We're building it. When I say we're building it, we're building the housing. The housing's happening, but yet I'm just kind of wondering how we're going to get the coverage, the dollars, and I understand the complications. You made a great presentation here about the pandemic and adjusting to the new norm. But do we just stop building housing with the anticipation transit's coming? Because we're waiving parking. We're getting a lot of pressure to waive parking because transit's around the corner, but yet it's not really around the corner. Thoughts?
Well, again, this project is focused on the near term, but what I will say is this: we have this. It's pretty clear that while downtown isn't dying, we may never need the levels of service that we had to simply to keep up with the loads in Portland previously. And I do think there's a very real possibility that we are going to shift some, and we're talking on the margin here, a few percentage points out of Portland and into other areas. So, but that again is kind of on this near-term horizon. The good news is, by doing this process where we're going to explore these very different alternatives of coverage, you will see more lines on the map in Clackamas County in the coverage scenario. Absolutely. But we may not be able to do, these are going to be a bit aspirational, but the good news is when we do these scenarios, we'll have a lot of ideas to draw from, and some people will get really attached from them, and we might then be able to leverage that energy towards funding. That at least tees up the longer term conversation, other than the near term that we're talking about right now.
But Commissioner, you're absolutely right. It comes down to money. Do we have enough money to make this commitment? And it is a chicken and egg sort of thing. I do think that, interestingly, the tolling issue is going to help with that. I think that we may get another bite at the stiff apple, and if we can get that and focus that on that kind of east-west thing that you've been talking about for a long time. And if we can get the mitigation money so that we can work with the smaller providers to get those jitneys or shuttles or smaller vehicles there to do that kind of last mile work, that may make the big difference. That may be the jumping off point. So it's what we call a pregnant moment right now.
Okay, next up is Councilor Craddock.
Thank you, Grant and Tom, for the presentation. Really interesting, and really appreciate that you're beginning to look at different options. I guess is the best phrase of how transit works in the region. But particularly with paying closer attention to the north-south routes, because I sure know in East Multnomah County they're sure valued. I can physically see it. More people are standing waiting for the bus on like 182nd. And in 162nd, you can just physically see more people hanging out at the transit stops waiting for the bus. So the question I have is, so those north-south routes are becoming more important. I'm sure most of us on this the Zoom event tonight have used Highway 212, Highway 224. I use it a lot. And if you head east on 212 after at least 224, as you head out through Damascus and into Boring, you'll probably notice that a lot of the traffic is heading that direction and head north. So they head north at 222nd, they head north at 242nd, they head north at 282nd. And so a lot of the traffic ends up, by the time you get to Boring, the traffic improves a little bit because a lot of them have turned left and headed north. The challenge, though, is that in the last 10 years, both the former city of Damascus and Boring CPO have pulled out of the TriMet district. And so I don't know if you looked at that map, as you guys are looking at, there's this big void there, a big section of Clackamas County where there's no longer transit service at all. And in fact, I think the most significant challenge that created is for those people that depended on the supportive services that TriMet offers for people that can't, that are homebound. So I guess my question to Tom and Grant, but also to this group is, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do to try to get TriMet district to go back to what it was and be in that unincorporated areas of Damascus and the Boring area, because that creates this huge void and doesn't allow that those north-south routes to be even created, because the transit agency isn't part in that area. So I just want to throw that out there and plant the seed and have you ponder that, because it's sure has left a big hole.
We agree with you, but people voted with their feet. If people pull out of the district, they pull out of the district, and we can't force that on them. But we do have people who are actually seeking to expand our service in their areas. Councilor Sherman, I mean, I know that your staff is looking at that. We met with your staff, was it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago in your city hall? And they said, how do we get Happy Valley into the transit district? And one of the things that I said was, well, we will be with you every step of the way. There is a process. There should be a public process going through it, but it shouldn't be something that TriMet says you must come. We can't do that. It's up to the community to say we want to come and we want to join the district. So
may I ask a question? As Happy Valley grows and annexes further east into Clackamas County, does that area automatically become part of the TriMet district because Happy Valley's in the district?
No, if they expand it, that doesn't mean that we go into that new annexed area.
Okay,
no,
thank you.
There is a border, a boundary, but we have to work with the city to be included in anything that they want us to be included in. But it was a good first meeting, I'll tell you that.
Thank you, Councilor Sherman.
Yeah, one clarification, Councilor Craddock, and then Tom, correct me where I'm wrong, or at least help me understand where the boundary is. I remember when Boring pulled out, made the request to pull out, they had no service. The businesses there were paying the TriMet tax. They had no service other than the service of the lift service here and there. And it was but there was no regular service through the area. So where my understanding was the boundary was Boring, it wasn't Damascus. So where's the boundary?
Well, there was service, but I don't remember exactly where the boundary was. We were just out in Happy Valley. Grant, do you remember where the boundary is?
Well, where it is now?
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
So it kind of follows Sunnyside out to about 172nd, but it only captures just a bit north of Sunnyside and Happy Valley, and the outer sort of northeast corner of Happy Valley that they're working on for planning is not in the district, and then so 212, 224 out to Estacada is, and so anything kind of basically east of that, what I just kind of described, is all out of the district.
Grant, can we get a map and email that over to Commissioner?
Absolutely.
Sullivan?
Yeah, there is some confusion, I will say, because Damascus was incorporated at the time when Boring pulled out, and it was not Damascus that pulled out of TriMet. And maybe Damascus was never in, but Boring was the only portion that pulled out, and I believe that line is right around 282nd or so where boring begins, roughly. But there has been some confusion at the JPAC table because I've heard Metro counselors, not all, just some say, well, Happy Valley should join TriMet. I said, well, Happy Valley is in TriMet. So
Part of it is.
yeah. So I guess we need to better understand what that desert looks like exactly, where the boundaries are.
We don't call it a desert, we call it the donut hole. That's how it looks to us.
Just to clarify, I believe Damascus pulled out before boring. I don't know that for sure. Do you happen to know that, Tom, what that history is about Damascus?
You know, I'm getting old, but I just don't remember anymore. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
And that was before, but if Damascus did pull out, that's way before my time because been
In my
followed
time
out a
too,
long
yeah.
time, yeah.
In my 15 years at TriMet, Damascus was already out, but boring pulled out during my time.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay, great. Next up, Mr. Myers.
Good evening. I appreciate a really good presentation, but I've got a disconnect that I hope you can help me solve. What I understand you describing is that they had a great, wonderful, comprehensive service pre-COVID, and it contracted due to the pandemic. And I hear people using the past term for the pandemic. A lot of people believe that this is more of an endemic, that we're going to be living with this for some time. So you're describing now a reemergence of TriMet and describing how that may change in terms of the patterns where people will ride. Before I lived out here in the sticks, I lived just south of the Hollywood Transit Center, and I would ride transit every day to and from downtown to my job. And I can remember sitting in a blue TriMet line and having people cough over top of me as they're crammed in the aisles. And I'm trying to fight my way into a very crowded MAX and having to get people to push all the way back, and we're standing face to face. And that's what the TriMet experience was in the early aughts or late aughts. How are we ever going to get back to that? How does TriMet ever think that we're ever in the near future ever going to allow ourselves to be that close? It does not surprise me to see that my old transit center at Hollywood was one of the darkest of I think it's the brown shades where you had lost so much ridership. It also doesn't surprise me that the east side of Portland has less concern for equity considerations. So I'm wondering how you're ever going to capture all of this and how safe the buses and the trains can be made to be. The TriMet reaches a large diversity of people, and I think that diversity has concentrated perhaps. And I don't know if that concentration is correlative with vaxxed and masked people, but I know that there is a concern that has people not on mass transit. We talk about airplanes. How safe are airplanes? How safe are buses? How safe are trains? And how does TriMet calculate into all of this analysis the very difficult thing of bringing riders back into the fold? That's where I'm stuck. Thank you. I know it's a little bit off topic where we've been going so far, but
no, it's very poignant and understood. I get the the benefit or the burden, depending upon how you look at it, of saying that it's not something I'm directly working on. Boy, I'm certainly aware of it. My focus is making sure the service runs where it needs to run, but there's some really great folks that are working on the reimagining safety, but also cleanliness and such, that I know that that's top of their mind, and that's a very big priority. So I can't necessarily speak to it, but yes, it's a concern, absolutely.
Myrna, it's huge. We work on this all the time and we look at it. What we do know is that it appears that with the airflow on buses and light rail, you don't have the transmission that you do in some other things, like an Uber car, for example, where the transmission is actually quite more significant. I take the bus every day, and I am surprised that right now my bus is standing room only. We've been seeing for the last 3 months an increase in ridership of 6,000 people a week. Until last week, and it broke my heart, it only increased 5,000. So it's been 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 5. Okay, we'll take it, but it is increasing. The other thing is it's a matter of history. what happens to cities when they endure an epidemic or a pandemic. They do come back. If they didn't, we wouldn't have Berlin or London or Rome. They do come back. So we anticipate that they will come back. But I'll tell you what, this is my first pandemic. Raise your hand if it's your first pandemic. This is mine. And we're all asking those questions. And we don't really have the answers. But we're judging by history and the way communities work.
I guess I'm just suggesting that it seems like that analysis has to also come into the decision-making on how it is you're going to change your routes and where you're going to continue them to. So I think it has to in some way fit into that, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. It's
Yeah,
a crystal
absolutely.
ball. It's partly luck, it's partly, I don't know, but it's hard.
Do you have trends that you show that you're working with, anticipated, or is it just what you're watching in terms of the numbers as they happen on a month-to-month basis?
No, Grant, you've got the answer to that one. They are looking at trends.
Yeah. Okay.
In terms of ridership or
Yeah.
right, exactly like Tom was just saying, it is coming back. Absolutely.
But it's something we're watching. And I said that I stay up at night thinking about one thing. Well, I think about that too. So it's tough.
Okay, well, I'm going to try and get us back on, keep us on schedule. And I do know that Luke's got a presentation as well, as I understand. So Councilor Pratt, do you have a quick question?
I do, somewhat related. On top of reliability and consistency, one thing we to encourage people to ride is safety. And it's somewhat anecdotal, but it's been my experience, especially on the MAX lines, and people I talk to, including our police officers, are saying they're seeing this increased, lack of safety. And I'm just wondering, in the short-term project, if you're going to be dealing with that at all. And I also think this is a way to help encourage employment of drivers to ensure their safety.
You're absolutely right. That's one of the biggest concerns. I mean, especially in the depths of the pandemic. We got the draft survey actually this morning on how riders feel about MAX. And so it blew me away. We continue to be one of the most supported or popular government agencies in the entire state of Oregon. We're in the 80 percentile of support, and it's even higher with our riders. The people who actually ride the system know whether it is or not. I was personally concerned about safety. How is this going to work? Not just with COVID and the transmission of COVID, but are there despicable people out there? Downtown Portland was pretty darn scary. It's getting cleaned up, but you're absolutely right. That's going to be our big push, I think, to make sure that the community believes that it's a safe system and that they can get on. Having enough police visible is going to be critical for us. And I think all of us understand that it's even hard to get police in any cities right now. A lot of cities only have half as many police as they used to have. It's a struggle that we're all trying to pull together on. So don't have an easy answer, but we're shooting for it.
Well, from my angle, from what I can work on with service planning, the more that we can focus on making sure that service is useful for those who need it, the more people will ride it. The more people will ride it, you get a broader cross section of the public, you get a greater sense of safety, frankly, from just eyes on the street, CEPTED principles. So from my angle, the more that I can focus on making sure service is going where it needs to go and people ride, hopefully that safer it will be. And then there's, of course, all those other folks working on safety more directly, but that's my angle on it anyway.
Great. Well, Tom, do you want to introduce Luke, or with the time we have left, or what's your?
Luke's going to talk about Oregon Transit Center, and he's going to talk about the beginnings of the discussions we're having with ODOT, who's been a great partner for us. So take it away, Luke. We got a time crunch now, so let's catch up.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Well, thanks everyone for giving us some time to speak tonight. My name is Luke Norman. I'm a service planner with TriMet, and as Trent mentioned, prior to coming to TriMet, I worked at Clackamas Community College and was on CTAC, and appreciate the support that C4 provided for the Connect Oregon grant we got to expand the transit center at the Clackamas Community College. So I'll just share a couple slides here. So as a follow-up to Grant's discussion, we wanted to make sure that C4 was aware of the parallel planning effort to support the development of the transit and multimodal strategy for the I-205 corridor to mitigate the impacts of tolling in the project area, which I know that many of you have been focused on. We believe that improved transit is a key part of the strategy to ensure that there are alternatives for tolling. So we've been working with our jurisdictional partners and other transit providers to help develop a project list that we want to share with you. As you know, and as has been mentioned, tolling can't pay for all the improvements that we'll need, since it can provide some of the big capital improvements, but can't cover the service or the new transit vehicles that we'll need. However, if ODOT's able to find more funds to help support the whole package, it provides an opportunity to free up additional funds for some of the Forward Together priorities that'll come out of our efforts with the public to help make sure we're incorporating the priorities from Clackamas County. So this map shows a draft of some of the projects that we've identified and we've started to discuss and vet with the cities and county, and then also the other transit providers. Informed by some of the origin and destination analysis work that ODOT's done, we know that people are traveling who are using I-205 travel throughout the region, and we want to make sure that we're providing new and improved transit service to help meet their needs. So our current package includes new transit service that would run from the Oregon City Transit Center to Tualatin and then connect to provide a one-seat ride up to Beaverton and Tigard, as you can see in blue. You can also see in the red and pink lines some of the service upgrades we'd like to make by increasing the frequent service on line 33, 35, and 79 to provide or ensure we're improving and continuing to provide connections to Oregon City, West Lynn, Gladstone, Lake Oswego, Milwaukee, Clackamas, and downtown Portland. In addition, there's a potential for new and upgraded shuttle service. That's definitely been a need that we've heard and has came up in discussion tonight by other non-TriMet transit providers. And then finally, there are some key capital improvements that we see as integral to tolling. So that includes some of the transit signal priority work and ETC improvements on OR 43 and 99E. That includes looking at the Oregon City Transit Center and looking for an opportunity to expand that. This slide here just shows a overview of what we're thinking about the Oregon City Transit Center. We've been working with our partners to figure out what's a new concept, because we think that any new transit service that we provide in Oregon City, that we provide in Oregon City and in Clackamas County needs to have an expanded capacity at Oregon City Transit Center. So this conceptual design allows us to double our capacity for buses, not only for TriMet, but also for other transit providers. To also expand the stops and the amenities that we have for riders. And then a key part is making sure we're able to modernize our break and restroom facilities, which is a key part of our operator retention strategy, so we can keep those drivers with us. And so we're currently pursuing a federal earmark for the Oregon City Transit Center to help sort of precede this work and If that's not successful, we will be looking for other options. Fortunately, the Oregon City Transit Center, the capital improvement, could qualify for tolling funding if we go down that route. So we want to provide a brief update to make sure that C4 was aware of our work and the conversations we're having with staff. So I'll pause there and open it up for questions.
Well, thank you, Luke. I'll ask, I don't see any hands up just yet, but I'm gonna ask one. It's my understanding, when you say tolling, are you talking about the Section 139 tolling? My understanding was that, I believe that's the right federal section. My understanding was that that was for only building the capacity on the highway, that transit was not an eligible expense. And that the mitigation would come with the congestion pricing elements of the 205 corridor. We were told by ODOT that we would qualify for that, and then we were left with, no, we really can't do that either. So I'm at a loss, and I know you're not ODOT, but I'm at a loss as to what resources can we constitutionally get, because I understand it was a constitutional challenge as well. So do you have any insight as to, frankly, what we actually can get? We're not getting a clear answer.
Just so that everybody knows, the Oregon Constitution prohibits money going to anything other than roads and bridges for anything related to auto expenses. And that includes tire taxes, but gas tax is really the big one that they're talking about. Registration fees, all of that. Now that's a recent interpretation by the courts, because for 80 years, the gas tax paid for the Oregon State Police. And then a judge about 20 years ago said, oh, well, we can't do that anymore. That doesn't make any sense. And kind of blew away the Oregon State Police, which was terrible. Anyway, so gas taxes and tolling fees can't pay for transit operations. They can pay for some things like park and ride lots that support automobiles. I mean, the courts have said that that's okay, but that's not the big one, right? What we need is funding for operations. That's what costs a lot of money. The question is, and I've had discussions with ODOT about this, well, how are you going to come up with that money? And maybe it is more money for STIF, for example. You increase that a certain percentage, and then you are able to pay for those little shuttles, and you're going to be able to pay for that big line that goes from Oregon Transit Center to Tualatin and Tigard and Beaverton. So you get that kind of big loop connection. And then you got the fanning out of the smaller shuttles. And that's why I think this, interestingly, ODOT could be the genesis of a big Clackamas County increase in transit, bigger than you're going to see in other parts of the region. And I actually think that's pretty darn exciting. And I think ODOT is going to be a great partner. I think they're going to they need to make this work. They honestly need to make this work. So the conversations really are just starting. It's not as fast as I've complained about, but they're getting there. So, and just so you know, we put in a request with Congressman Schrader for an appropriations for Oregon Transit Center, just so you know, and for $5 million, and TriMet would put in another, I think, $3 million for improvements there. But we know that it's gotten passed to the Appropriations Committee, so it's passed 2 hurdles already. But that's an aside. Some of us worked in Congress. We all know don't count the money until it's there. So anyway.
Well, thank you, Tom, for asking that question. So just to clarify, so I can just understand this completely, is that you're saying there's opportunity for, capital, but really our challenge is, if you look at the basic essential bus service or expanding in Clackamas County in our prior discussion, the challenge is really not so much the cost of the bus, but really just the cost to provide the fuel, labor, and all of that. So where does that money come from?
Again, that's going to be something that ODOT has to help come up with, right? That's their burden. They could do ramp metering, for example. That's okay because it's road related, but they can't pay for salaries for bus drivers.
Right.
You see the difference?
Well, yeah, I do. And I guess the challenge has really been for us through this long journey on the tolling is that we were on the onset, we were told that the funding would be there for that. And then that was left with all these challenges, and we learned that it's really not there. So you're not ODOT, so don't expect you to be able to answer for ODOT, but you have helped clarify the constitutional challenge is what it is. And I think it's that gap, it's that uncertainty. And that's why I've argued that frankly, the 205 project, as far as tolling, is the last place we ought to be putting tolling in place, because there's no transit along that corridor or along the communities. And where there is transit is that greater network that you displayed on that one map. That's where the tolling should start, because it's ready. It's not ready along this corridor, and that's not your fault.
I am grateful that you recognize it's not our fault, but it's the challenge that we got.
Right. Any questions for our presenters? Councilor Heisey.
Yeah, I'll just add to that I think we do, what I'm hearing and what Tom's saying is we as C4 have some nimbleness and creativity that we should kind of keep in our back pockets and on tap. And as we're looking at what's happening at the OTC, and to just continue saying to ODOT, how are you going to do this? How are you going to do this? This is what we need. This is what you promised us. How do you deliver? And keep the pressure on to do that. And just because we have all of these constitutional limitations doesn't mean that if there's enough political will, we know usually someone can come up with a way to get there. So I think that's the direction we need to keep our focus on C4.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Counselor. I think the frustration has been that this project was enacted by the legislature. In essence, the legislature, they're the lawmakers. The impediment is the law or the Constitution. So it seems to me that the problem is obvious. The need is great, and I guess we need to start getting our loudspeakers out and talking to our legislators and say, fix it. We can't do it without their help.
Yes, but I want to restate that the place to push, we have been very good at saying this is the wrong place to begin tolling. And I agree. I believe that. I think we could put more emphasis into, okay, this is where y'all put us. Let's figure out how to pay for it. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
We need to keep in mind the shift that's going to get us what we need as a region, and not get bogged down in this was a bad choice in the first place.
Yeah. Trent.
So just wanted to thank TriMet, but also share with everybody that there's more transit conversations on the horizon for C4. One big opportunity for this group coming up is that all of the transit providers will be going through the STIF funding. I'm going to say it wrong, so please forgive me, but they're going to start looking at how those STIF funds will be allocated and prioritized moving forward for the next couple of years. So that will be a conversation that's coming up. In addition, small transit providers, and we have many that work with throughout the county. In fact, we probably have the most of any county in Oregon, are going to be working together, probably with TriMet. It's my goal to make sure everybody's on the same page here, because everyone's on the same page at this table for C4, is bringing back to y'all those opportunities around that STIF funding allocation, any opportunities that might be coming up in the future, if the STIF conversation were to have any flexibility at future legislative sessions. We want this group to be aligned on those efforts, whatever that's going to look like. So it's my commitment to y'all that those transit conversations, you have a little, in the bylaws, a kind of like a tack for transit. So it's been my goal to put that group together. This is a great opportunity to take this conversation, roll it into that discussion, especially as we get towards the STIF funding process that's coming up here pretty soon. And then we'll make sure that this group and that TriMet, or I'm sorry, that transit group as a whole brings back recommendations for C4 and keeps everybody in the loop, especially to advance those 4 goals that were mentioned earlier for C4 as it relates to transit.
Okay, great. Well, Grant, Luke, Tom, thank you for your presentation tonight. Thank you for taking all the questions, and we're a little bit behind, but it was worthwhile. So thank you so much. Trent, let's go to our next agenda item, which is the survey for our potential retreat.
Thanks very much. I'll just share the survey with you right here. Thanks for everybody who participated in it. I think we had 18 results. So 18 participants. Thank you very much for doing so. 10 questions because it costs money to do 11 questions on SurveyMonkey. I learned that. And so I am both A, cheap, and B, mining the public tax dollars on that one. So here we go. And just for context here, we're trying to figure out based on last month's conversation, do you want to take a trip to Eugene and learn more about those shelter models that they have there in Eugene and around Eugene, because they have a variety of models, and we have a variety of communities that might be looking at different needs or different abilities or different interest levels on the types of shelter programs they may or may not want to introduce. So here is in Eugene, we've identified this really good place that can showcase a host of models and show folks the different varieties that could maybe match different community types that we have throughout Clackamas County. As it relates to going anywhere at all, this survey helped us just have a bigger view of what everybody really thought in terms of this process and some technicality things. So in general, what is your level of excitement to attend a C4 field trip to visit Eugene and learn about those various housing shelter models? Over 50% excited or interested. Got one meh, which I was really excited about that I even put that as an option. So one meh, and then a couple not excited. And that's okay. Trip to Eugene is about 2 hours. So to make the most of the trip, do you feel it makes sense for this trip to include an overnight hotel stay? Strong no here. And I got to say, I might have teed this up poorly. If I had more questions, might have been able to tee this up differently. I'm still open to the idea that this could be your C4 retreat, where perhaps we use the hotel and have a debrief afterwards and wake up in the morning and do some of that prioritization conversation that I'll talk about. So if it's just about the visit to visit the hotel shelter or the shelter models, I agree. Probably strong no. We could do this all in a day. If you want to expand it to be something bigger, a hotel stay might be wise. Strong opinion for Saturday. If we do a 1-day trip, Friday 2nd, Monday was a close third. So that was a surprise to me. And we even had Sunday options in there, which was a second surprise. But strong idea for Saturday or Friday if we do a single day trip. Overnight trip, flexibility, Friday to Saturday. So very similar to our former retreat models that we've done in the past. Full-time job, does the former C4 model of starting somewhere on Friday, going to Saturday work well? Mostly yes on this. Few that it's not an option for them, and that's hard. But with our retreats or with our field trips, we do try to invite literally anyone who is interested as it relates to C4, including not just C4 members, but also for those cities in particular, do your other council members want to attend and participate in this to bring back that same information. And this is also why we have alternates. What is your preferred transportation method for such a trip? Let's go on a bus. TriMet, can y'all give us a bus? I'm reaching out for a trip like this. Some folks might drive individually, though. We understand that that travel is complicated sometimes. There's also a train that goes all the way down there. I've tried it before. I had to get on a bus actually when I tried to come back on that train. FYI. For members representing cities, metro, or the county, would you invite your folks to come, and do you think they'd be interested? Probably not was the answer, but it seems like the C4 members in particular would come. Generally, an interest to pay a registration cost if we need to pay for a bus or food, etc. So that was encouraging on both just a trip and also if there's an overnight trip, same thing. Prefer to stay in the hotel if we do one versus finding our own. So that was good news for me. I can go find that if that's what we end up doing. And generally speaking, August or September looks to be the stronger preferred months. Those are, I think many of y'all know, scheduling dark zones for a lot of us because a lot of folks travel in August. But if you are telling me August and September, I will, the survey says, according to this, that is when folks would be available to prefer to go do a trip like this. I'm looking to you. I can make anything happen. If we want to just keep it to a field trip for looking at shelter models, we can put something really creative together. We've worked with our housing team to come up with some ideas and making sure that we're, getting the information around those for the full variety for that trip down there. If we just want to do a trip around going and seeing that and coming home, we can do that, and we could figure out how to do our C4 prioritization / retreat discussion in a different way. But if you want to tack it on, we can do that too. It is nice to do those retreats in Clackamas County proper, but if we're already doing something big and we're all together, also, the opportunity, don't want to miss the opportunity to combine some of those things. So I'm here to listen. Those are the C4 field trip survey results, and I will do what you asked me to do.
Okay, thank you, Trent. You kind of said it or alluded to it at the very least. Our C4 retreats are typically anyone and everyone's invited to our C4 retreat. So you don't need to be a member of C4. You can be on a city council, you can be on a district, you could be a citizen. Anyone's eligible to participate. So same goes here, that if there's interest in that from anyone who's interested in the topic or the shelter scene, the sites in Eugene, that let your colleagues on your boards and commissions and councils know that. So if we do get to a place where we actually get this going, just want to put that out there for the new members, that it's not limited just to C4 members. So any thoughts on Trent's presentation? Councilor Sherman.
Thank you. I think I'm a fan of taking more time together and actually, using the time more fruitfully. But I guess the question would be, and I don't want to put a lot of work on Mr. Wilson, but are we able to kind of create a structure? What could it look like if it were a 2-day thing versus just kind of if we just did the 1-day thing versus 2-day, and that way the decision is more based upon kind of what are we actually looking to accomplish versus just committing to the 1-day versus 2-day thought process and then structuring it around that commitment. Does that make a lot of work for you? Is that a reasonable ask?
The work is here, whether we make it or don't make it. So let's make this the best thing that you want it to be. That's what I would say is the workload's not the issue. It's what's going to work best for C4. My recommendation would be that if we made it a 2-day thing, we would probably leave mid-morning from the county. If we did a bus, for example, try to get there around lunchtime, so that we would have the full afternoon to visit the variety of sites. With my colleague, we think that it would be roughly 3 to 5 hours, give or take, of sites to visit. It's a lot to get to and walk around and digest, and probably spend maybe a happy hour or something if we did a hotel. Once we got back, do a happy hour to digest and talk about what we saw, what was there, what are some takeaways. And then I would loose y'all into the ether of Eugene to go eat and feed yourselves. And then we would come back in the morning for perhaps a working breakfast into the morning, maybe in the mid-morning to talk about some of those C4 priorities for a late morning lunchtime trip back on that bus. So that would be at least my draft proposal if we were going to do an overnight stay and make the most of our time.
Very good. Thank you.
One thing I will just mention is that, and again, Trent alluded to it, our C4 retreat, our annual retreat, we do almost every year for the past 20 years, has really been about making sure that we know what the priorities are for the coming year, and the executive committee, the people you appoint to be on that, will set the agenda for the year's time. So it's really a C4 driven agenda. And in the last 3 years, we have really put less, I won't say less, but being a land use and transportation type body, we have ventured into housing, we have ventured into shelters, we've ventured into a number of things. So I think probably more than ever, as a member of the executive committee myself, having the guidance and the priorities better understood by the group is probably needed more than ever to make sure we're on the right track. So I will just put that out there. If we want to make Trent's life easier, I think maybe we do both, the tour and tie the retreat all in one, or we're going to be tasking Trent with 2 excursions or 2 events, if you will.
Maybe. I probably would say that if we end up doing just a single day field trip, my recommendation will most likely be that we use one of those final warm months to just go to a winery for our C4 meeting and have like a big open-ended conversation for your C4 meeting to do that same bigger thing. Just something I want to put on the table for everyone to think about. That's always on the cards if we want to do it that way without a retreat.
Okay. I'm going to try and keep us on schedule. Counselor Heisey, thoughts?
Well, I had some, and then he threw that option out there, and now I'm all, who knows? I guess I had a question. Did we already determine as C4 that we wanted our retreat to be focused on shelter and housing? Okay, so if we're talking about making this trip into the retreat, I don't know. I know that after that tour, all I'm going to want to talk about is what we just experienced for however long you give me the time, because that's how we work as elected officials. So if we do have other priorities that we want to consider at a retreat, I might actually, sorry, Trent, lean toward doing this as a one-day event and then having our retreat as a separate thing.
Okay. Anyone else want to jump in? How about a straw poll, or just a physical show of your hands? How many people want to make now that you've heard everything and laid it out, we got the survey, but how many people think a one-day trip is your preference? And then the second question will be a 2-day trip. So I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 or so hands up. Martin?
I'm sorry, my iPad raises my hand in Zoom if I raise my physical hand, so I didn't have a comment.
Oh, okay. Okay. Charity?
I think she was also raising her hand for the straw poll.
Okay, so
yes, I'm sorry. I was just raising my hand.
okay, I think that was a majority of hands. Was that not correct, Trent?
It's a majority of hands for a single day trip. So I'll work on that, and I'll probably what I'll do is I'll see what the availability is of the team, our team, as well as the folks down in Eugene who would help us on that tour, which will probably include a Lane County Commissioner. It's Pat Farr, who helps facilitate a lot of that work, and then just if that'll give me some dates to work from, and then you'll get a doodle poll from me, maybe before or around the same time as our next meeting, which will be I think July 7th.
Okay. All right, great. Well, we'll move on the agenda to our updates. JPAC, who would like to? Counselor? Put you on the spot.
I also missed JPAC last month, so I don't think either one of us can speak to it. Maybe Chair Craddock can tell us what happens.
I apologize. I don't have the agenda in front of me, and I'm going to have to go back into the recesses of my mind. I guess I'll just say this. I don't have any specifics at this moment because I would need to refer to the agenda, but it was based on the last discussions we've had in the last few months at JPAC regarding, of course, 205. It was a meeting that there wasn't a lot of controversy or significant discussion. So it was a meeting that went smoothly and we ended on time, but I apologize to give you specifics at this time. I would need to go back to the agenda to refresh my memory.
Yeah. I do remember it was on the agenda. I was absent that day myself, but I remember the agenda was approving the ODOT additional funds for the 205 project. It was pretty much the big dollar ticket item. So great. What else do we have for updates? Thank you, Councilor Craddock.
Well, I'll just add that for JPAC, you have a decision point coming up at your next C4 meeting related to the RFFA proposals that are in process right now, the Regional Flexible Fund allocations, and they're tied to the Metro Open Space Bond allocation as well. And so just this morning, your CTAC group met to prioritize those Clackamas projects that were submitted into those programs. Your C4 Metro subcommittee meeting in a week and a half, 2 weeks, we'll talk about that prioritization and then give a recommendation to this body. So at your July meeting, you will sort of formalize that recommendation before it goes to JPAC in July. there's a little bit of a stair-stepping process here coming up. I wanted to share that that's part of your JPACT work plan here in the next month and a half or so.
Thanks for the reminder. Commissioner Suarez, may I add to that just briefly?
Sure.
I just want to encourage you to take the survey for the regional flexible funds survey and encourage your constituents to do the same. It's really important to help influence the decisions. So I can't emphasize that enough. It's really important that you take the survey and you encourage others to do the same. That really will give a lot of direct feedback and will likely influence the decisions.
Okay, thank you. Counselor?
Trent, if you have that handy, if you could drop that into the chat, the link to that survey, that would be great. You may not, or maybe Councilor Craddock has it handy. I know I had an email with it in it somewhere in the past 2 weeks. I was just also realizing perhaps I should mention that I will be in Washington, DC next week on the JPACT lobbying trip. So there will be fun to report at the C4 Metro meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Just
is there someone, Councilor Sherman, you want to do the impact update, being that Mayor Buck is not with us tonight?
Sure, happy to. Councilor Craddock, did you have something you wanted to jump in? I think we just jumped over you here.
Well, I'm just gonna, if instead of setting a link, if you just go to Metro's website and go to the regional flexible funds, just put it into the search engine, the link to the survey will come right up.
Sorry, Councilor Craddock, I didn't see your, you were about ready to say something, so.
Nope, that's good. Okay, and I think if I remember correctly, JPAC seems so long ago. Didn't they also get an update on like the I-5 bridge, the local alternatives for the alignment? I think that was kind of one of the things that was kind of interesting as well. MPAC actually didn't attend, but I did watch it, so that's a good thing. I think the last update I saw, they got an update on the placemaking grants. So had some really good presentations from some of the recipients of those grants. So it was good to see like real world scenarios of how that money is actually being used, the impact of the community. And then also the other update, it was actually Councilor Lewis, I think, kind of led everything during the meeting. The barriers to shelter siting and working towards kind of the future opportunities there. And there were a number, I don't know if anybody else attended that one, but there were a number of key points that were really intriguing, that were things I really hadn't thought about. And one of them, pretty sure, if I remember correctly, was Mayor Truax, had some insights from Forest Grove and like siting of shelter locations in relation to like public transportation and how the desire is not to have them tight in right on public transportation because of both the local residents and the residents of the shelters don't want to have that kind of ongoing overlap. So it was better siting for them to be a little bit farther away from mass transportation. And that was something I had never heard before. So, and I could be totally wrong in my conclusion, I'm remembering incorrectly, but I'm pretty sure that was my takeaway. So I don't remember, I don't think there was anything else that we covered at MPAC. Thank you.
Okay. Ed Gronke, is there anything you want to add as a member of?
Yes, I think the thing that struck me during Mayor Truax comments, as well as Christine Lewis's discussions of the site problems, were the amount of time. I think they said you should plan on at least 2 years before you can come up with a satisfactory site. It's going to take that long to convince the residents of an area that the site should really be in their area. The NIMBY syndrome came up strong during that presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. As someone who's been following the sheltering thing for a long time and the influences of the light rail line, I certainly watched with interest when the interstate line opened, how long it took before the discussion started. Of course, then the actual construction or the setup of the Kenton Village was one that followed, along with another facility in South Multnomah County along the Orange Line nearby. So it seems to be, and same goes for the shelter in the 205 corridor as well. It seems to be something that is part and parcel of that. So it's interesting to have understanding the NIMBYism, but the need is certainly more apparent. It was certainly more apparent in my area when the Orange Line opened that sheltering was going to be something in the horizon. Something neat in the horizon. Getting back to the agenda, Climate Action Task Force update. I think I know the answer, but Councilor Pratt.
We're not meeting right now. We're waiting they're doing community outreach.
Right. Thank you. Supportive Housing Services update. Trent.
What's awesome when you have those like monthly reminders instead of just remembering to do it is you actually have the answer when you're asked about it at C4. To date, the Clackamas County Supportive Housing Service Program has received, wait for it, $28 million because those April tax returns have come in. So it was kind of, relatively speaking, small potatoes until the April revenue stream came in. So I think y'all remember it was like, 200,000, and then it was 400,000, and then it was 800,000. Then there was the funding commitment via Metro. Thank you very much for that. But it hit in February. There was a $4 million installment, $3 million in March, and then in April, 19.3. So we're at 28 million, 350 million. So that's back on track with what there was anticipated many moons ago when the program was first imagined.
Yeah, and just so you all know, I put in a request in a few months ago to Metro in Portland, who's the actual collector. The city of Portland is doing the collection on behalf of the Metro measure. And the request I put in was, please, when you have the monthly disbursements, please break down which of those dollars are 2021 past due taxes and how much of those are 2022 current. The notification went out late, which is why the collections started late. So it's no surprise that what we thought we would have last spring is now coming true today. So what I did get just a partial snapshot, and I would say that it appears, just off of memory here, I don't have the exact numbers, that 90+% of the revenues we're seeing are the 2022, and that probably a comparable amount of money, if comparable amount of money is coming, that'll be 2021 back taxes. And I know this because a number of people have called me, said they got a phone call from someone on behalf of Metro. I assume it's the city of Portland saying, by the way, you owe us taxes and we want our money. So I'm assuming that there'll be a significant amount of collection efforts being made. So as those dollars, as we're budgeting, I want to see which of those dollars we have that'll be that surplus wave of money versus the normal stream of dollars. So just so you know, hopefully we'll have more information in the future. Next up is other business. We're right at 8:30. We can go a minute or two longer. Is there any other business for the evening? Wow, we're gonna end this right on time. Well, thank you all so much for attending tonight. And all y'all have a safe drive home. Bye-bye.